Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Speaking in Color Saturday, also known as Six Saturdays. We're going to wait just a little bit to allow other people time to come and join us. And then that way we can kind of get started and talk about some things pertaining to connections of culture. This topic is so important because what's going on is that a lot of people now are connecting in so many ways for so many reasons and joining together, regardless of their beliefs, religion, what skin they have, how they were raised. And the reason why I say skin, because, it's supposed to be not so much a race thing now. It's called skin, flesh, or what have you. More people are tapping into culture instead of race. But when you fill out the applications, it still talk about race. So we are going to just really talk about connections and cultures and what does that really look like and what it means. So I'm going to, like I said, wait a little bit to allow more people to join us. Probably about 1 or 2 minutes, and then we're going to get started. Okay, so for the sake of time, we are going to get started because we don't be on all night. Okay, so thank you, everyone, for joining and being a part of the session today. We're hoping that today we do not have issues like we had last week, that when people wanted to join, for some reason, there was a fluke in the system where it just shut down the whole session that we had. So once again, welcome to Six Saturdays, also known as Speaking in Color Saturdays. I am Vernita Naylor and my daughter, Nicole Naylor. And so we're going to talk about connections of culture. And so what I was saying when we first started was that cultures are changing. Even though people still say it's race, and race does have a part to play in it, a lot of people are going more by their culture, who they are, how do they identify. And back in the day, probably 60 years ago, cultures spoke in so many different ways. It spoke about how you lived, your religion, your beliefs, what you ate, where you lived, and different things like that, who you connect with based upon the color of their skin or the community. But now it's changing how we interact and connect and how we are becoming one. You can have a Lebanese person now getting with a Hispanic person. You can have a white person getting with an African person. You can have a Latin person getting with an Asian person. People are just interconnected in so many ways. And it's not just in intimate relationships, it's even in friendships. And so it goes to show that regardless of your religion, your race, as people call it, because that's what's on the application. They say, what is your race? um, People are interacting and connecting in so many ways based upon different cultures of food, community, and different things like that. So I'm going to read the definition of culture to really help us to be able to identify what we're going to be talking about today. So culture, the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarding collectivity. The customs, art, social institution, and achievement of a particular nation, people, or other social group. So cultures just really crosses the line in so many different ways. And what prompted me to talk about this was I noticed that like Meghan Markle, is that how you pronounce her name? Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew, totally different culture of people in so many different ways, even in their profession, so many different ways as far as their culture. And then I saw Shaman Derek, and he is now engaged to the Norway princess, which is really interesting. And then I saw an Asian princess who married an African prince. And I was like, wow, things are really changing and evolving. So things that once used to separate us, now we're really connecting. Now all that separation is now becoming a melting pot. And it's really exciting to me to be able to see that and to see how people are connecting in so many ways. Just like watching when people are cooking food and how a lot of the chefs are blending food from different cultures to make drinks, alcohol or desserts or any type of food, entrees. And it's just so beautiful to see, like, what is it called? Street foods, truck foods, different type of foods. I love watching those. I think it's on Prime, where you just watch people do and create different types of foods. And it's based upon culture, even dancing. When people are dancing, that's based upon different cultures. And it's just so beautiful because the dances that we do now, like twerking, they've been doing it in Africa for, whoa, it blows your mind to see that something that we think is, oh, that's twerking. No, baby, that's an African tradition that they've been doing for years. I don't know what they call it, but it's just culture. And now, because of social media, the culture is coming closest to us, where it's really blending in such a way that we're able to see things in real time and really be able to see how everybody is ebbing and flowing. So I'm just really excited. So to get us started, let's talk about what's changing, why, and is what's changing a fad or is it here to stay? Anybody want to get started?
Hello. Welcome to Six Saturdays. I'm just going to be very brief, but I think that it's exciting to see that, there is not one race of people. We are all one race of people, but I think there had been so much separation before that, it made it a big deal on, oh, you're this culture, you're that culture. Now everyone is melding on a different level and just seeing how they have commonalities and how they are, similar in so many different ways. And then making a hybrid culture where you have the mix of two cultures together, and having children from that space. So now you have so many mixtures, so many facets of different people that, you know, it's really changing the culture and how we accept things. It's so much more than the narrative that, wants to be pushed on a regular basis of just black and white. There's so much more now that we have and experiences and are integrating in our lives, to where, you can't even use, just the black and white anymore.
Right.
It just makes the whole thing obsolete, because that is no longer, that is no longer the thing. I mean, a lot of people try to keep it alive because there is big money to be made in keeping things separate and, segregated in a way. But everybody is pretty much at this point mixed with everything. And even if you are, no one is just black, just white, just Asian, just Hispanic. There's so many, factors that tie into who you are as a person individually and collectively. And then a lot of people are also going in searching and looking into their culture via, ancestry and different other engines that are able to let you know, who you really are, what cultures make up who you are. And so when you're finding that out, you really get a chance to really be immersed in who you are actually and who your true self is. And once you're able to understand who your true self is, then these hangups that you are given as time goes along about who you shouldn't associate with, who, what color of people you should steer clear of, what cultures do this and what cultures do that. Once you really discover who you are, you don't have those negative biases about other cultures and things of that nature as you would if you didn't know who you are and basically just base everything that you know and how you operate off of what someone told you or what family members told you or how you saw things be done in your family, so you just continued it on. So it's just really great to see everybody integrating with the thought process of being human, you know what I'm saying, and wanting to be their best selves and wanting to ascend and do better. I mean, and everybody is not on that level, but there are majority people, or the majority people are on that level, which is allowing the vibration of the betterment of us as a collective get better. It's helping to snuff out those who are racist or prejudiced or walk around with these isms or bias that stop others from being able to commune one to another. And then I noticed, especially with the younger generation, there is a lack of judgment so far as culture.
Right.
Younger generation, they're not looking at this person like, oh, this person is an Asian person or this person is a black person. If you like them, and you're interested, these youngsters are, getting with each other. These youngsters are having friends, multicultural friends.
Right.
These youngsters are having multicultural boyfriends and girlfriends. They're going to different events. Even if you might not be Jewish, there are people that are going to their friends' Jewish bar mitzvahs. There are people that are participating in quinceañeras and other things that are of another culture.
And may not be in a relationship with them, right?
Right, may not necessarily be, but you're interested in that person enough and care for them enough to say that this is my friend and my friend is having something and I'm going to participate in whatever tradition or whatever, that my particular friend respects and celebrates. I know that, my friend doesn't eat a certain thing because my friend is of a certain culture. So when I go with my friend, out of respect for their culture, I'm not going to go anywhere. Suggest a place that my friend cannot eat at, or just different things that people are doing to break down the barriers of separation and really begin to immerse themselves in each other, to where there's no one cult. I mean, there's no several cultures. We all are eventually, just one eclectic melting pot and one culture.
And one good thing you said about that too is it's also helping the elders, the older people, to also see that, like you said, mitzvah or quintiera, and mom, I want blah blah to come. Oh, they're not of that culture, but they're being able to open their mind as an elder to say, wow, okay, they can come, where at first it was just for their culture, and people were not intermingling and doing that. So is creating another channel for integration, even amongst the elders who were raised in a certain way of not allowing, different
And speaking of elders, when they, I don't think that their innate objective was to make sure that they were separated.
Right.
But based off of how they lived and different things that happened with them and their family and their loved ones, they developed these stigma and isms regarding, communing with certain other ethnicities, or certain, demographics of people, certain cultures. They just grew up, knowing to stick with your own. And, within that, you are safe, so to speak, which that is definitely not the case, but within that you are safe. And so when you grow up and you have certain experiences that cultivate that mindset, then you raise your children to be like, well, that's such and such. You shouldn't fool with them because they're another culture or they're another nationality. But I like that on TV, on commercials. Actually, I'm more pressed to see a commercial with all the same nationality or all the same demographic now. Majority of the commercials that are being shown are multicultural families,
Right.
LGBT community,
Right.
Younger and older mixed together.
Yeah.
So they're just continuing to push this narrative of universal collectiveness, not having, a thing about ageism and things of that nature, to where it's helping the older culture and community understand that things are changing.
Right.
It might not be, what this definitely not the end by a long shot, but things are changing and you can loosen up a little bit so far as how you were raised, what you were taught, you stick to your own. That is not, the case now. That's those things are being broken down by what we see on a regular basis also.
Right. Does anyone else want to touch on that, about what's changing? Why is this happening? Is this a fad or is it real?
This is Vera.
Hey.
Hey. I have had a different experience. I grew up in Jim Crow, Mississippi.
Okay.
In the 50s and the 60s. And my experience, of course, was of that time. And my parents and grandparents were very militant and very proud people. And they taught us like Black Pride before. It became popular in the late 60s with James Brown's song. At the same time, let's just to sum it up, I call my parents and my grandparents the Black Archie Bunkers.
Okay. Okay.
That was it wasn't their underlying message was, oh, you can't trust the others. So like how to beat them with a longhandledspoon. Right. Right. So I grew up to be separate and I embraced it. Even when forced desegregation occurred, at first we had freedom of choice and they wanted me to go to the white school so that we could show them that we're just as smart as they are, and I refused to go. Okay. And to go. And I cried all summer. Okay. And for my 2 years in the integrated school, I refused to interact. Whoa, okay. But I married a military person in the mid-70s. And I was And we moved onto the military base. Totally different culture, and not in terms of color and I don't subscribe to different races other than the human race.
Right.
I even put it on forums anymore, but it was a totally different culture. And my neighbors I had a Japanese woman married to a white man. I had a Korean woman married to a white man. I had a white man married to a black woman, and I had a Jamaican lady. These were our neighbors, and in fact, my daughter's friends were friends with all of them, plus one blonde, blue-eyed girl named Tracy from my hometown. Her mom and I graduated from the same high school. We never met each other.
Oh, wow.
And she and Nika became friends.
Whoa.
And we used to go to each other's house and have house parties, play chaperone. I was the Girl Scout leader for the base. And the parents used to jokingly call the girls the United Nation.
Oh, okay.
The representation. And I started to learn, and like I said, Tracy's mom and I graduated from high school same year, never met each other. And it wasn't because of racism, institutional racism, is because of racism on Vera's end. And I just literally did not interact. Right. But our daughters became friends, and that is how we met. And when she would go home, she would take Nika and drop her off at my mom's, and then she would want us to take Tracy when we would go home. And
that didn't happen, huh? That didn't happen.
I don't know about a child with us traveling into the Mississippi Delta. So, but at the same time, when I was working in different cultures and being exposed to it, and we used to have dinner at each other's house to have each other experience our cultural dishes, I'll put it that way. Right. And it started to strip away some of the things that I was taught growing up. And I started living in that culture, in the military culture. I started to see, okay, all people are the same fears. They have the same desires for their kids. And excuse my French, but assholes come in all colors. Yes. I mean, then it's not whether the color doesn't define the person, it's the behavior. Right. And the mindset that does. So that started on me on a journey in terms of how to view people for who they are and not what they look like. Right. And it's been a very enriching journey. And things haven't changed, of course. And in fact, the first time my daughter had heard the N-word, she was on the playground on the military base. And the thing, she didn't even know what that meant. Right. And she came home and she said the guy called her that, the little boy called her that, and she was like, what does that mean? And I was like, oh my God, I've crippled my kids because I need to teach them. That is a huge part of society outside of a military base. So, and they need to be aware. So, but at the same time, I tried to teach them to accept people for who they are. Right. And but when they became teenagers, they became a little militant. But as they got older and wiser, they started to embrace people for who they are. And in fact, Nika and the couple of the young ladies are still friends today, and they're like almost 50. Oh, good. Little group. But it's the cultural thing is an interesting thing, but it really just relates to the community, and the rituals and protocols of the communities are different. But in terms of the person, we're the same. We We want the best for our kids. We fear for their safety, not just from different races or which I don't subscribe to, or different people who look differently, but from evil people.
Right.
Which can come in all colors.
Right.
And outside. So it's been an interesting journey. And in my hometown, we're in the small town of, especially Indianola, I have found that
now Indianola, where?
Divided by the racetrack.
Now, where's that? Indianola, what state?
Mississippi.
Okay,
I'm
Mississippi.
from the Mississippi Delta.
Okay.
I grew up in Greenville.
Okay.
But as I told you, I started searching my ancestry about 15 years ago. And what I found was my grandfather was, Black people always say they have some Indian in it. So my grandfather was our Indian connection.
Okay.
And his mother was, his mother was, let's just say his mother's mother, I put it that way, was part Choctaw, part French. Okay. I mean, part was full-blooded Choctaw. Her husband was part Choctaw, part French.
Okay, gotcha.
And his dad was 100% French, and his wife was full Choctaw. My great-grandmother is the one who introduced the African-American side to the family. She married an African-American. She was part Choctaw, part French. Okay, gotcha. So when I did the DNA test, and I found that I'm like 94% African, 4% Western European, 1% Bangladesh in India. Oh, okay. And one, yes, we don't know. I don't know where that came from. And it was like 1% Wales. Okay. And so I have been studying the culture. Well, I've always been intrigued with France, and I took French in high school and college. For some reason, I've always been intrigued with the art, the architecture, and everything. So I already knew a lot about that. But I've been studying the Choctaw Nation culture. And I've been most of my African DNA is Nigerian and Cameroon. With 8% Mali, which that's another story in terms of the connection I've had with it, but I'll share that another time. But I've been studying those lately, and I have found seriously similarities in the culture, in the belief, and most importantly, the spirituality, belief side of it. It's been really an eye-opener. And with the DNA test, I have white DNA connections, but they give you a breakdown of, and they compare your what parts that you're connected and like what they have. And there was this blonde, blue-eyed lady who she was like the opposite of me. She was 94% Western European, and she was 6% African. And the funny part was we didn't connect. We weren't from the same part of Africa. Okay. We connected in the Western European. Gotcha. DNA piece. So it's been an interesting journey. And as Nikita said earlier, yes, we're all mixed with everything. No one is pure. Right. Have you heard of mitochondrial Eve?
You said the mitochondrial Eve, the first Eve, the first Black person. I mean, the first Black mother.
Everyone has one of her DNA markers. Everyone in the world has one of her DNA markers. Her DNA markers. Right. Yes.
Right. That reminds me of Henrietta Lacks. People who have gone to the doctor, gotten different treatments and stuff like that. They have, a DNA from her for different things, and it's going back to that. I mean, it may not be as the mitochondrial Eve, but it's just the Black woman keep on surfacing. some kind of way.
No, she is like she said, she's the original woman.
Right, right.
Everyone has her DNA marker.
Right, right.
And
right.
this is not a wives' tale that's been done. This has been proven by scientific proof.
Right.
And
right.
this is what is so astounding. And this is why I just, ignorance is taught. As a child, you don't necessarily just start, operating in certain ways. It has to be taught to you, because knowing that to be fact, that, all of us collectively have DNA connection, which means that in fact, we're all related. We're all basically different variations of, African. And so it's just like, or it goes even back before they called Africa Africa.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's not even, oh, you're African. You're, what they called Africa prior to
Back in
even
the day,
discovering Africa. I want to say Kemet. You know what I mean? It's astounding to me how people want to hold on to ignorance so much so, and really stick behind, different thought processes about how superior, when it's evident that we're all on the same level. And so I noticed that you did speak about earlier, and I'll let someone else answer the question also, just in case they wanted to, but also answer this question. So initially, when we were all together, there was a mindset that the only way that, well, the only reason why we decided to integrate was to, have better housing, better education, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, there was really no reason to integrate at all. What do you guys feel is the benefit or the pros and cons of integration? Some would bear to think that if we never integrated, we all would, be a lot better off. And some people think that the integration for all was best. I know for the African American community, the integration has, greatly greatly devastated the community in different ways. So what is you guys' opinion, pros and cons on the benefits of actual integration?
Well, for me, this is just based on my experience. We were stronger as a community before integration, and we, like in terms of the education, when I was in school back in the 50s and the 60s and the early 70s, the teachers went above and beyond to give us a quality education. Although we received inferior books that were outdated, they had an extra curriculum
right
for us so that we could get what we were not getting from the public school system. They went above and beyond.
Right.
And there was a sense of community, which is the part that I miss a lot. Which meant that we stuck together. Right. And we made sure that no one went hungry in that neighborhood, even with the schools. And in the schools, we had a separate curriculum from what they gave us. Even they would request books, and they would give us Greenville High School's old books, right, and give the books we requested to Greenville High School.
Wow.
And but the teachers would create the information. We studied Black history before it became a thing. Uh-huh. And they made sure that we knew about our heritage. There was a sense of pride that I find lacking today to that point. It was like a sense of pride to the heart in terms of it wasn't a selfish thing. Because of that pride, we worked together as a unit.
Yeah,
versus an individual.
Yeah, I remember in school when I went to college, the teacher was saying, he said, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. He said, but a lot of African Americans cannot pass Black history. the class Black History. And I had to prove him wrong, because in my school, my teachers, even though some of them were white, majority was white, they really focused on making sure we were fully educated in all aspects of history, English, I mean, everything that they taught. And it's really sad, and I do hear that quite often. A lot of us people of color do not know our history. And if we had to take a test, we would not be able to pass it. So that's kind of sad.
So here's the deal. In Mississippi, when I went to college, I went to an HBCU.
Mm-hmm.
And the study of Black history was part of your gen eds, and you received credit. When I got married, I came to Alabama and transferred to a white school. They did not accept that as a history. I had to take American history. They did not accept that as a gen ed.
Mm.
And so I had to take American history with the lies. And this is the world according to Veer.
Wow.
But because I had been educated in Black history because of the extra things my high school and teachers did, and because of in college, I knew that it wasn't factual.
Mm-hmm.
Columbus discovered America.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, number one, and Lincoln only freed the slave to save the Union. He didn't give a flying fig about us.
Right.
But I still had to study that. But what about the young people who did not have someone teaching them, and not just in school, but even like the elderly people in the community would give us the history of our people, tales that have been passed down, and not necessarily tales, but after desegregation, the forced desegregation, we were forced to follow their curriculum. Mm-hmm. And this is Greenville, Mississippi. I can't speak for anywhere else. And if you don't get that, anyone who did not get that foundational information about the contributions that we made to the building of this country, and the contributions we made in terms of inventions, if they didn't get that information, they're studying. If you look at the history books, the context for us is slavery. Right. And how Lincoln freed us. Mm-hmm. So know that there are a group of us who would not be able to, because we haven't had the opportunity for formal study. And I'm glad the regular curriculum of the schools. I'm glad that you said that. I'm speaking for Greenville, Mississippi.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say, I'm glad that you said that, because I don't think that it's just a Black thing or African American thing. I think that a lot of people of culture, Irish, Arab, Arab culture, and those. Let me bring it back around though. A lot of people don't know their culture. Or a lot of the things so far as their history is concerned, because one of the main things, like Ms. Vera said, was the elderly. And I feel like so far as the African American community, since we have been snuffed out at such early ages, we don't have a lot of the elderly like a lot of other cultures. We don't have, the older Sicilian grandmothers, or the older Arab, or, Hispanic, or we don't have those things. A lot of our matriarchs and patriarchs are, 50 and 60 at best. Some people are older. I'm not saying that everyone is, but when it comes to, like Ms. Vera spoke about, that passing down of real information, there has to be at least 2 to 3 generations that have experienced that are still living to actively do that. Also, because of how things are now, a lot of cultures have kept their tradition in not sending their children to daycare, which is a whole other topic in itself, because people are in an uproar about this education system, but really it's your responsibility to teach and train your children.
Oh, that's a whole new. So refresh everybody's memory of what you're talking about and why that's so prevalent, because everybody don't know
About what?
About the children and how the parents are upset that the.
Well, I don't want to get off topic, but I'll just say this.
I'll say this.
In culture, it even and we just pulled up the actual term for Africa too. The original Africa is Al-Kibalan. But in culture, we did not have schools and things like we have now. We didn't have these organizations, basically these nonprofit organizations that funnel money to teach our children. You were at home with your grandmother and your great grandmother or your grandfather, whomever was old enough and they weren't leaving out of the house to make a living. You were at home with them. They taught you how to read and write. They taught you economics, because you guys were, cooking and, teaching how to make dishes, teaching how to, do housework, to clean up properly. And then in the interim of this, if your parent or grandparent knew how to read or write, these were things that you were also taught along the way as you were, as you were with your grandparents while your parents went out to work. A lot of people have kept that tradition, but now a lot of people are in uproar because of the educational system and upset that children don't know certain things. They're not teaching our children this. They're leaving that out. This is going on, which I'm not saying that is not true. It is very true. They are doing a very piss poor job when it comes to educating these children. And like Ms. Vera said, not telling the full history. Everyone knows, or is starting to know. This is the Great Awakening. Everyone is starting to know what real history is, what has happened, just through education. There's nothing that we we should be able to say that we don't know due to the information that we're able to get and receive. As long as it's fact checked and understood, there's so much more history that they teach us and show us. I mean, there's so much more history that we actually have than they actually teach us and show us, and that are in these books. So parents, and different parents are upset because your child is not receiving an adequate education. This is not just in, arithmetic and doing, the standard things. They're not getting life skills that they need to push forward in life. They're not getting a clear education so far as, entrepreneurship. I know back in the day, even when I was in school, we wrote checks. They showed us how to write checks out. They showed us, how we were to write in cursive. The art of actually penmanship is gone, which I actually love. You want to woo me, write me a letter, like a handwritten letter in like great handwriting. Like handwriting is gone now. And so a lot of parents are becoming upset because their children are not cared for and are not educated properly, when you really look at it, that is your responsibility. The system in which we live is not going to teach your child how to advance and overthrow it. It's not going to teach your child how to be a self-thinker. It's not going to teach your child how to move forward in life without being a worker or falling in line. It's not going to do that. And so if you would like your child to be a certain way, you have to educate your own children. And so I'm saying this to say, and piggyback off of what Ms. Vera said, when we had more matriarchs and patriarchs of a certain age in the communities with our children and growing up with us, we knew more of our history. We can name off people that made contributions in our lives. We can, we understood, the different activists and the different leaders and, the thought leaders and the writers and, different things that were happening at that time to bring us to where we are now. We understood that. But since, especially predominantly in the African American community, we're not having as old matriarchs and patriarchs in our family. We're not having those ages reached in our community with our families. We are losing a lot of that. So I just wanted to piggyback on that, because it's not just a lot of cultures do not know their culture. They don't know, the contribution that their cultures have made. They don't, and some of them in this new age are not even interested in learning and understanding the cultures that they have come from. I know some people that I went to school with when I was younger. Your family speaks Spanish, or your family speaks a native tongue, and you don't want to learn that. If I can learn a language or be integrated in knowing how to speak more than just English, I would take great advantage of that. I would love to, speak French and Spanish and all of these languages simultaneously and be able to adapt in different areas. But because it's quote unquote not cool, some of these youth and young adults, they don't want that type of integration. So yeah, I just wanted to agree with you, Miss Vera, because that is major. And I was going to say that prior to you saying that, we are losing so much history and so many good nuggets that we could receive, because we don't have the matriarchs and patriarchs in our family as some other cultures. Right. Some other cultures their children don't even see school until they get to junior high. A lot of cultures don't even see school in general until they get to junior high, or even, some see kindergarten. But it's unnecessary, because their family is able to give the child what is needed so that the child can go out in the world and be a more well-rounded individual as they move forward in life. So yes, we don't know a lot of our history, and a lot of us don't. It's not just an African American thing. A lot of us don't, but predominantly African Americans, because we are not, our matriarchs and patriarchs are not here to give that information.
And the irony is too that a lot of our parents and the grandparents don't either have the time, because they're working so hard to survive, to teach the kids outside of what they've been taught in school, thus not preparing them as well, because a lot of other cultures do take that extra time to teach their kids outside of what's being taught in school. And that's something that we're missing as well.
Well, because they stick with the program. If their culture is to, the parents go to work, the grandparents stay at home, right. The grandmother, and I've seen, older people working at Walmart, Ross, different people. And it's like, you're older, you should be able to sit back at the house and kick back. That's not how society is these days. But the people who are able to put that in practice, they are, finishing better off. They're wealthy, and not just wealthy in monetary sense. They're wealthy in spirit. They're wealthy in culture. They're wealthy in, family and unity, because they're able to follow the blueprint. The elderly stay home with the children, raise the children. The younger people go out and make a living. So the elderly don't even have to worry about that. Their job is to cultivate that within the children.
But then the thing is too, I noticed a guy who used to work at IRS. He was really trying to, he was an older guy, really trying to go up the ladder. And then all of a sudden, I noticed he works at H&R Block. And I said, what happened? He said, oh, my grandchild is about to go to, was it preschool, I think he said? And he said, and so I opted to spend more time with him so the parents can work. So,
And that's great.
and that's another thing, the trade-off, that some of us people of color may not be able to do, so anyone else want to give an input? I know we've been talking for quite a while, but anyone else want to give an input?
Well, to go to the idea of culture, you start off with the definition of culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to start with getting into the details of what that means. Because if you think about the word culture, typically people associate it with a people group or a continent or a race. When really, when you think about culture, nowadays you hear people talk about, well, what's your office culture? Or work
Right.
culture? People will say Google has a certain kind of culture.
Correct.
And
Correct.
they're not talking about any kind of ethnicity or
Correct.
race. They're talking about what is the atmosphere, or the ethos.
Right. Right.
What is the overall philosophy? What is it like when you come here? Do you wear the sandals and barefoot, or are you in a suit?
Right.
Like you go to Silicon Valley, some people out there are like, no, we don't dress up. We just hear the code, so we're just gonna be in our flip flops.
Right.
So I think when you think about what culture actually is, you have to then get more critical how you think, because now you have to deal with all these different layers, because your culture may not be just about your race.
Right.
Your race is definitely connected to a part, your culture, because of that, where you originated from. But you could have a part of you which is just I guess the way I define culture as a way of doing things.
Right.
And so when you have two different ways of doing things, people are going to disagree. So, well, this is how we get married in my family. Well, this is how we get married in my family. And you're not even necessarily having a disagreement about race. You're just having a disagreement first and foremost about, well, this is just how we've always done it.
Mm-hmm.
So then if you have a dominant culture, they're going to say, well, this is even you said the word traditional, that's a word I think about a lot. That's kind of a code word. Traditional is well, whose traditions? Right?
Right.
Everybody has traditions.
Right.
So to just use the word traditional, just like a trump card, oh, well, this is traditional. It's yeah, well, if we've only ever done one culture's tradition, of course it's traditional.
Right.
But you assume that other cultures don't have their own traditions.
Right.
So I think that's one thing. And the other thing I was thinking about too was, back to the first question about, how things are changing. One interesting thing that I thought about recently, so me and my mom, we've been reading the book of Revelation, and we came upon the river Euphrates in one of the verses, and then we were going back to Genesis where Euphrates was mentioned. So then we started going into Mesopotamia and, the Fertile Crescent, and this is the cradle of civilization, and everything came out of Mesopotamia. So then we got on Google Earth, and we're just looking at all these places Iraq, Mesopotamia, Lebanon. And it's wow, when you don't actually look at the geography and the history of the world, you don't really know what you're thinking about. You just kind of abstract.
Right.
But then when I saw the map, I was just look at this. Here's France over here, but then you have this New Orleans, France colonization down here in America, and then you have English colonization here in Africa. It's you just look at all these different languages and names that have been all cross-pollinated all over the world. And so to your points earlier, it's we already have been blending as a human race.
Right.
It's just been a denial or a lack of awareness. Just even interesting things I watch a lot on World War II and Nazi Germany documentaries. And so I was looking at, I think it was the Netherlands or Deutsch, not Amsterdam or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at the map and it said Harlem, but it was spelled Haarlam, I think. I was oh, that's interesting. There's a Harlem over here in
Wow.
So recently I looked it up, and someone have to double check this, but it said apparently there was a Dutch settlement in New York, and so then they named it Harlem the way they spelled it, and then over time Americans changed it to Harlem. But here's the other interesting thing, and I'm guessing this is a connection because Biggie Smalls, he raps in Bedford Stuyvesant, the livest people just be rapping street names and
Right.
neighborhoods, not even thinking about what it is.
Right.
But the Dutch settler in what I think 1600, his last name was Stuyvesant.
Oh, wow.
So it's like all these things you just think, oh yeah, it's just here, it's always been. It's like, no, like there's a reason for this. Like these people came over here and they did this and they named it this and they put their culture and their stamp on it. And now you're rapping about it in hip hop. And you would never think of this, melting pot of, why is this hip hop rapper rapping about a Dutch settler's last name that they probably don't even know what it's about.
And look, check this out. I found it. You're right. It's Haarlem. It's a city known for its forages, enclosed courtyard gardens. And then they said the gardens were surrounded by charitable almshouses and were used to house poor, unmarried, and widowed women. So it's really something. So the connection of Harlem, dealing with, the culture that's, housed in Harlem, New York, and Harlem in the Netherlands, which is housed for poor, unmarried, and widowed women, but children and all that kind of stuff. But it's just dealing with the poor overall, Wow, that's cool. That's cool. Huh. Wow. And so then with that, also, Bernard, what are the pros and cons of integration?
Well, I mean, I think, so what you guys were talking about earlier, I think the first thing, I'm always specific with words. So I wouldn't even call what happened, say, in America integration. I would call that forced integration.
Okay.
Because it's not actual integration.
I would agree. I cried all summer.
Because integration in and of itself is a normal word. I always tell people, like, you have integrated circuit boards in a computer. Or somebody says, oh, integrate the music with the picture for the film. Like, integration is just a part of life. When you cook food, you're integrating seasons and spices and ingredients, but you want to do that. So that's the first thing I would say. There's nothing wrong with integration, is if you want it. If two people are like, hey, let's come together. All right, great. But when you're taking two cultures and mashing them together, especially when one culture was just dominating the other one, like, not that long ago, it's not really integration.
Yeah, that's true.
But the pros and cons, I mean, obviously the pros are whenever you get things together, it's obviously going to be more rich. I mean, just as a musician, I always speak in those terms. If I just played the piano, that in of itself, you'd be like, oh, that was really nice. But then when I start adding different layers, and not just different layers, like layers from other musical styles, like, oh, like this has Arabic influence, and oh, this has Japanese influence. Like when you hear all these things mixed, you're like, oh, this is rich.
Right.
So that's the word I always use, is rich. I'm always saying I want to be more enriched and rich by other people. I mean, the cons are obviously, it takes a lot of work, even if you're going to do it right. I mean, it's hard enough to get two people alone, just individuals to agree on something sometimes.
Right.
Now you're talking about a whole people group. Like, oh, how do you want to dress? Well, how do you want to have church? Like, how do you dance? How do you clap? Well, what do y'all want to have to eat? Well, how are we going to eat? Like, now it's just more multi-variable. So the cons are, if you don't have patience and you can't see the fruit of it, you probably gonna be frustrated and gonna question why you ever did it.
Right, that's true. That's true.
And in line with what you said, Bernard, you said a key thing in terms of if you do it right. And I can tell you from my experience when we were forced to integrate in 1970, they closed all the Black high schools and they only made the white high school the one high school. The culture, of course, we had white flight. A lot of people who could afford to put their kids in private school did. Mm-hmm. They canceled the prom because they didn't want to have an integrated prom. Wow. And parents were literally, there was this little white girl, we were going in between classes and we had to go through this little patio, and this white girl was walking along and talking to this Black boy. Her mom pulled up, ran and snatched that little girl like he was getting ready to kidnap her. Wow. Now, what do you think that does to a 16, 17-year-old psyche to live in that, under those types of microaggressions? Right. And sometimes just very overt.
Right.
aggressions.
Right.
That
Right.
just, the experience even more.
You having flashbacks, huh?
That was and that's just a part of it. We had to do a walkout at the beginning of school because it was just like they wanted to just continue, just totally snuff out anything that had to do with us and make us just operate under their way of doing things.
Right.
So no, it wasn't done right. Well, again, I'm only speaking for Greenville, Mississippi, because that was my personal experience. It wasn't done right. And it wasn't so much about being forced with the races. Like I said, me not interacting with the white people, that was on me. And, and how I was taught in my family, like my family literally were the Black Archie Bunkers. But the environment, it was just not conducive for mental health, seriously, and not just for us, but only for the white kids too.
Right. And that's something as we're talking, I'm just thinking about this, how the cultures in different parts of the world were different. Like you said, the South versus maybe the East Coast versus the West Coast versus the Midwest. Everybody has a different culture and how they deal with, the different types of integration or dealing with the mixing of the people based upon, religions, beliefs, or what have you. So that's a different thing too, because people are going to see it from so many different viewpoints based upon where they were raised, and that's a big difference too. So that's really a profound statement as well, because I'm seeing, even though you and Bernard are in two different eras and generations, but still I can kind of tell some of the differences just based upon the conversations in correlation to mine as well, so it's really something. Because Bernard, are you in the Midwest?
No, I'm on the East Coast, Virginia.
Oh, you're in the East. Well, that's the South, though. Isn't that considered the South?
Well, I see, that's what's interesting. I talk about that with people all the time. I mean, I live in Virginia, and so there's North Carolina, South Carolina, and then next to us is West Virginia. Above us is DC. So as far as I was growing up, I never considered myself the South. I guess partially because when I heard the word South, I thought of like Alabama, Mississippi.
Gotcha.
I mean, even like think about
Gotcha.
Florida. Like Florida is in the South, but people think of Florida as Southern. Like no, they think about it like retirement and tropical. Like so. I think part of it is a mentality. Like I always felt like Virginia was like literally right in the middle. Like
what part of Virginia do you live in? North Virginia or South?
Charlottesville.
Close. How close is that to I used to live in Alexandria.
And like 2 hours, like 2 hours from DC.
Yeah, so you're considered in that DMV area, Northern Virginia. And I used to have to, like, with people were always the people in North Virginia think they live in the North. And the people in South Virginia, they think that that's the South. And I used to have people out trying to come at me about my Bama cousins. And I would have to remind them that Virginia is the South. Just because you are in the DMV area doesn't make you in the North. But they see it, there's a distinction and there is a divide in Virginia in terms of whether or not they consider it the South.
Yeah, I'm just noticing that because like you said, I heard about the DMV, the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, right? That was makes it,
Virginia.
Yeah,
they make that distinction.
Right.
Yes.
But to me, coming from the West Coast, Virginia was the South to me.
It is the South.
The Carolinas, all that. So it's just mind-boggling, like you said, all the separations. And I never understood why, but I said, oh, okay, okay. So
well, I think, like I said, I think it's okay when you hear. Okay, here's part of the problem.
When
you turn on one of these PBS documentaries, you got that slow mosey music with the banjo and the black and white pictures, and it's like the South, the deep South. right? So your mind associates the South with like say Alabama, Mississippi. What's these movies?
Tennessee, is Tennessee South? Is Tennessee considered the South? The Carolinas?
See, I don't know. Like when I don't know.
Yes,
When I
they
think
are.
of,
I mean, to me it is too, but I'm just asking according to what he's talking about.
I guess, like I said, I think part of it is, I mean, obviously you have a map, but I mean, like a lot of it is perception too. Like, I don't know, because I lived in I grew up in Chesapeake, Virginia, so we live near Virginia Beach. So when I think of water and coasts, I don't think of South. It just feels like naval bases in Norfolk. It doesn't feel like the South to me. It just feels like I don't know. Plus, I guess also because I think like in terms of like we were talking about Biggie Smalls, East Coast versus West Coast. Like when I hear coast, I think water. I think New York, Maine, Maryland. But when I think South, I don't think Virginia. Whenever I grew up, I never considered myself a Southerner. If someone's like, "Oh, you from the South," I'd be like, "I'm from Virginia."
Yeah.
I mean, partially it's also, as we talked about, I don't really care about a lot of this stuff anyway. Like when I go somewhere, it's like, "Oh, where are you from?" That accent, like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't care. Like, I don't pay attention to accents. I mean, I hear them, but I'm like, okay, great, you're from the South. Now let's talk about you. So I just don't get caught up in a lot of this East, South, North, West anyway. But I think part of it is how you look at it.
Yeah, and the reason, right, but the reason why I brought it up is because the reason why I brought it up is because of perspectives, because I'm noticing different perspectives. And that's why I ask people where they're from, because me being from California, we have a whole totally different perspective. And so when I'm talking to other people, now instead of me saying, "Oh, that's kind of weird," I now have reframed my thoughts and I ask people where they're from. And that helps me to now understand why people are saying the things that they say. Because the 3 years that I've been in Georgia, this has been mind blowing for me, how people perspectives are, and how they think, and it's just mind blowing for me. So that's the only reason why I asked.
In the good old days, the South was defined by, they had drawn that Mason-Dixie line.
Right.
And that's how they defined the South.
And the line determined what?
Like those states that were considered the South.
Oh, so that's the differences in what Bernard is saying now.
Well, not really.
Oh.
I mean, he's saying state of mind. I'm just saying the South was literally, especially during the Civil War, though the Mason-Dixie line, those states that were identified as the South, and that line ends at Virginia.
Okay, so that's what I was trying to understand. So it has a line where it separates.
In the old days.
In the old days.
And that line wasn't, it's a blur now, because it's really not that important.
Right, no, it's not.
It is important to a lot of people now, but back in the old days, the South was defined. So because you had the South against the North, so you had to determine what states were a part of that.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting because my grandmother, who just recently died, my dad's mom, she was like 90 something. She wrote a whole book about her life. She's on Amazon and everything.
Wow.
So my sister sent it to me. I finally got around to read it, and I'm so glad I did, because it was hilarious. I didn't think it was gonna be that funny, but it was hilarious.
Really?
So, yeah, she just wrote stories about her growing up. So she grew up, well, it started off, I think, in Alabama, with the story of how it was her granddad, I believe. Yeah, her grandfather was friends with this white man as a kid. And then when they grew up, he worked for the white man. And one day on the job, he was like, "Pick that up, boy," or whatever. And I guess he felt like he had to show his dominance for his, coworkers. And he was so shocked. He was like, why are you talking to me like this? We grew up as friends. And so he defied him, because he was like, "I'm not responding to that." So they went home. He went home, got the wife, and was like, "We got to pack up and leave." And she was like, why? So we just got to leave. So they packed up everybody. And then they said as they were traveling, they saw the smoke from far off. So I guess they knew the house was being burned down. So that's how the book starts.
Whoa.
So then she just tells the story about, you know, her and my granddad. And I think they went up to, they were like, so basically the family ended up in Chicago, Indiana area. But she was telling this one story about how she went from Chicago to Louisiana, I believe, where my grandfather was stationed for the war.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was just sitting on the train and she was just like, you know, minding her own business. And then somebody got up and was like, oh, you gotta get up out this car or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, what are you talking about? She's like, oh, we didn't cross the Mason-Dixon line, or we in the South now.
Yeah, I saw that on TV.
Car. And she was just like, what?
Right.
So then same thing happened. I think she was in Louisiana. She went into a restaurant, sat at the counter, and she was noticing it was taking forever to be served. And so she was like, does people not see me? Like, what's the deal? Like, she's like waiting around. And then, so that was like her first two realizations of like, oh, people really do, like, they really do this. Like, they make the people move from the train car and they don't serve Black people. And I was just like, I'm glad I read it because I realized how much I was like my grandmother. Because I would have been the same way. I would have been like, what? We got to move cars. Why?
Yeah.
Oh, because we crossed an arbitrary, invisible line.
Right.
I would have just like, I would have sat at the counter and be like, okay, where the food? Oh, y'all really don't serve people. Okay, so y'all really serious about this.
Right. Wow.
There are a lot of stories with families, because my family actually started in Virginia, migrated to Arkansas, and eventually Chicago. And the way they went to Chicago was because my grandfather had a similar experience in Arkansas that your ancestor had, with them defying being treated like less than and having to pack up and move in the middle of the night.
Wow.
There are a lot of stories about like that.
Wow. Wow.
So I think partially I brought it up because you mentioned the Mason-Dixon, but then also, like I was saying, perception. Like I said, reading the book, I was like, man, my grandmother, we are so alike, because she just seemed to be about herself and her dreams, and she was focused. Like, I know who I am, I know what I want to do. Yes. I know God is with me. I'm not really worried about what you think of me. So when she confronted these perceptions about her, it really confused her, like genuinely confused her. Because I'm very similar. Like, when people are like, why are you like this? Or why do you, I was like, why do you care? I've been looking at me, number one. So to her, like, she just goes wherever, north, south, and she expects to be treated the same, because in her mind, there's no difference about where she's from or where she's going. So that's why I say, part of it is introvert, and I'm an internal person. Like, I kind of take my mind, obviously state of mind wherever I go. Like, oh, I'm in New York, cool, I'm still me. Like, I go to Virginia, I'm still me. Right. So I've never really felt this like I'm contextualized by where I live. So that's what, when I talk to people like, where are you from? I'm just like, well, who cares? I really, literally, when people ask me where I'm from, I'm like, why do you care? Right. That's literally my answer in my head. I don't have no idea why you care where I live.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I guess the thing is, like I said, it does, for some people, it does make a difference, because it helps to frame the conversation, because then you can now listen more to what the person is saying, instead of being inquisitive of why they're thinking that way. Does that make sense?
Wait, say it again. I kind of got what you're saying.
Okay. But... So, for example, like when I moved here, and, in California, we fight for all kinds of stuff. We're always fighting for something. And so when I came here, people were being talked down to, and no matter what culture, even your own was talking down to people. And I said, why are you letting that person say that to you? And, they give me their reason, and I'll say, where are you from? Now, just because they're here, it don't mean they're from here, because I'm trying to contextualize, why would you think that's okay for someone to demean or oppress you? And then, so the person would say, well, like I said, Martin Luther King was here and blah, 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 blah. And, you guys used to fight, like we did in California. And I hear the different reasons, depending upon where they're from and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, and I know that's not the same for everybody. Don't get me wrong. But it helps me to understand where they're from, because then I begin to put my mind, okay, they're from Colorado, or they're from, Texas, or they're from Michigan. So it helps me to understand how far I'm going to go with my conversation.
Right.
So that's all. So maybe, I'm not sure that's their reason too, but that's for me. That's for me. So then,
okay.
Yeah. So then, depending upon where they're from, like, for example, this person here, people just talk to her like she got a tail. And I keep on asking her, why this, why that? And she's from Denver, Colorado. So then I'm thinking, okay, you're a sister in Atlanta. You've been here 20 some years, but you're from Denver, Colorado. Okay, so I got to reframe my mind. So then I have to talk to her in a different way, and I'm not saying oppressive or anything like that, but for her to understand something, you know what I mean? So that's all.
Right.
That's all.
Well, I guess to your point, the word you use, frame, I guess is the word that I hear, and I hear it differently, because when I hear frame, I hear someone trying to put me in a box so they can decide how they can relate to me.
And pretty much it is. It's kind of is. It is kind of, because the thing is, it's like if I'm coming from an aggressive area, and then you are not about a fight, but yet instead you want to complain to me about something, I do need to frame myself and put you in this box to help you to understand how to fight if you're claiming you want to fight. That's yeah. So yeah, you're right. It does.
So yeah, I think most people, though, their framing is more of a lazy framing. In my experience, it's more, okay, let me ask this question where they're from, and then when they say the North or the South, then it's like, okay, now I know like who they are.
Oh,
like what to ask and what not to ask, versus just allowing two people to be human and just kind of let the conversation evolve where it might go. So I see it as a kind of like a scripted thing, like, oh, where are you from? Oh, Virginia. Because this is what people do. They go like, where are you from? Virginia. Oh, Virginia Beach. So you went to the beach a lot. Like, they don't even let me talk. they literally insert, oh, you went to the beach. And I'm like, no, not a whole lot. Like, I'm not really a beach person, because that's the only logical place their mind can go is, oh, he said beach, Virginia Beach. He's a beach person, East Coast. That's the only thing I know how to say. Right. So I guess I don't like it, because it tries to like frame or trap people into these like conversations that go nowhere to me.
Yeah, I get it. That does make sense.
And then they want me to come back and say, so where are you from?
Right.
Oh, Colorado. So you mountains, huh? You ski.
Right.
Like, we're just making these assumptions about each other based on geography.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense coming from what you're saying. That does make sense. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
It has to do with mindset. I grew up in, like I said, Jim Crow, Mississippi, but my family taught us, like I said, Black Pride before, they taught us that no one was better than us.
Right.
And we were forbidden to not look anybody in the eye, although Black people were not supposed to look white people in the eye. And we were also taught to be prepared, and is my philosophy today, be prepared to die for your dignity.
Right.
And so that's how we grew up. And when I was in Virginia, when I was working at the Pentagon, these people with their narrow minds, again, the ones I interacted with are the ones I can speak to. And because I was from Alabama and I was working in the Pentagon, this person told me, obviously, you're not originally from Alabama. And I was like, oh, no. And they were like, I thought so. Where are you from? I said, Mississippi. And he was like, you say that like you're proud. What's so special about Mississippi? Ooh, and I said, it produced me.
Wow.
No
comments. Wow. That is something. Wow. Okay, so we're going to be wrapping up soon. Does anyone want to add something before we close?
I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, what I always try to do is keywords to just leave people when they replay this, some keywords that we talked about. So the keywords: commonality, connecting, facets of change, cultural differences, ancestry, biases, separation, integration, humanity, eclectic, tradition, Jewish, Muslim, LGBT, Black power, Black history, freedom of choice, military versus civilian culture, long handle spoon, one eye opened, and strip away biases. Bernard, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think just kind of reiterate what I was saying earlier about culture is, I think I would say culture is transcendent of race or ethnicity or what do you like ancestry. Because I mean, if you put a bunch of people in a room who never knew each other, over time they would develop a culture.
Okay. Yes. True.
They would all decide there's certain things that we do together and don't do together. And then if an outsider came in there, they'd be like, "Oh, who are you?"
Right. Right. Right.
It's like, we all sit in chairs. Why are you sitting on the floor?
Right.
Just simple things.
Right.
So I think it's really helpful to understand that culture starts with the individual. It's almost like you have a culture inside yourself before you start thinking about, well, how do you relate to these other people? Because you have things that, like, just like in a marriage, for instance, you have things that you do before you get married to someone, and they're like, why do you do things that way? And they're like, why do you do things this way? And obviously those things were influenced by where you grew up and race and ethnicity and all that. But it's still just like I say, a way or a preference. So I think when people really start to define, or what do I call my culture, rather than these like iconic symbols, like, oh, I'm from Japan. It's like, well, just because you're from Japan doesn't necessarily mean you like Japanese culture. You might just be from Japan.
Correct.
Right? You might just been born in Japan.
Correct.
Because there's people who, I mean, the thing that's interesting, like you think like Wu-Tang is interesting to me as a rap group, because they were influenced by like kung fu movies.
I know. Isn't that cool? That was so cool.
They're influenced by these kung fu movies that you would say, well, what does Shaolin Temple have to do with New York? Right? But they started, like, the Wu-Tang started calling Shaolin Allen, like their little Staten Island is the new Shaolin. So, no, they decided to make that their own culture. They decided, I like that. I want that to be a part of me. I enjoy that.
Correct.
So I think that's, to me, what's interesting is when you can be a open-minded, ever organic human being that says, in a lot of ways, I can make culture whatever I want it to be. And that's what America tried to do. Like, let's put everybody together.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That is great. Thank you so much. Vera, you want to add something? Okay.
No, when Bernard was making the comments, I was just thinking, like, the military culture is a classic example of where you have multiple cultures within that one culture.
Right.
Each person different, but we all share the same mindset in terms of the military part of it. When someone, husband or wife deployed, the community would all come together and support that person and help them while they were away. So it's the military is a culture, but there are multiple cultures within that military culture as well.
Right.
And learning the different ones was very enriching.
Right. Yeah, because I always hear people say that, especially people who have been on the front lines or been in war or whatever, what could have separated them initially by their culture, their skin, their skin color, once they come back, that's my brother, that's my sister. It's a whole different ball game, because it's something that has united people, which has created yet a different culture outside of the person's skin, religion, upbringing, or what have you. So yeah. And it's funny, military versus civilian culture is a totally different thing too. I used to work at the Oakland Army Base and Naval Supply Center. It was a whole different thing being, actually working there and then being a civilian. It was just different. That's a whole different thing. So anyway, here's a quote. A nation's culture resides in the hearts and in the soul of the people, by Mahatma Gandhi. So I just thank you guys for just being here with us, and we hope to see you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye. Y'all have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.